You know, we hear the word diversity thrown around all the time, but what does it actually mean? What does it feel like? Today, we're going to explore that, and we'll start with something pretty simple, something you've probably even done yourself.
Okay, let's start right here. Have a look at these two drawings. On the left, you've got one with these really sharp lines, vibrant, kind of geometric shapes. Then on the right, it's a portrait made with soft, flowing colors. Now, they're both drawings of a person, but they couldn't be more different, right? Totally unique.
And that simple observation, it leads to a much bigger question. Why is it that no two of us will ever draw the same picture in the exact same way? The answer? Well, it's the key to really understanding diversity.
That unique way of drawing? Well, that's just one tiny thread in this incredible tapestry of who we are. Our differences are woven into countless layers, creating this really complex and beautiful picture of our identity.
I mean, think about it. It's the languages we dream in, the food that reminds us of home, the beliefs that guide us, and yeah, even the way we put a pencil to paper. All of these threads, when you weave them together, they create the rich fabric of diversity.
But here's the big question, right? With so many differences, can we ever truly bridge the gaps between us? Can a real friendship grow when people are so fundamentally different? Let's find out. Through the story of two boys who shared a name and pretty much nothing else.
So, let me tell you a story. This is the tale of two Samirs whose worlds were miles apart, even though they met at the very same street corner every single day.
Our story starts at the chaotic Genpot crossing. You can almost hear the horns blaring and feel the hustle of the crowd. And in the middle of all that, you have a boy on a bicycle and a boy selling newspapers. Just a simple transaction that somehow sparked this incredibly unlikely connection.
And right away, the first barrier they hit is a simple assumption. The newspaper boy is just shocked that the cyclist speaks Hindi. "You look so Angrez," he says, which basically means, "so English." And in that one little word, you can feel the vast distance between their two worlds.
And here's where you can really see their two realities, laid out side by side. Samir Ek, he goes to school, he speaks English, and he studies Hindi just like any other subject. But for Samir Dam, who's never even stepped foot in a classroom, Hindi isn't a subject, it's the language of survival.
But then, something totally unexpected happens. The next day, the newspaper boy shyly tells him his name, Samir. The cyclist is so surprised, he says his bike almost wobbled as he replied, "My name is Samir too."
And just like that, from that day on, they are Samir Ek and Samir Du, Samir 1 and Samir 2. It becomes their little secret handshake, a way to acknowledge their differences while celebrating the one thing they share. In that small joke, they find common ground.
But their little bubble of friendship is about to be burst by the big, messy world outside. The next day, Samir's usual smile is gone. He talks about trouble in the city of Meerut, about riots and violence.
And when Samir Ek asks what's wrong, Samir Du reveals a part of his identity that had never even come up before. "I'm a Muslim," Samir, he says, "and his family is in Meerut." And suddenly, a difference that hadn't mattered at all becomes a giant chasm between them.
That was it. That was the last time Samir Ek ever saw his friend. The next day, and the day after that, the corner was empty. The story just ends without an ending, leaving this haunting question, where did Samir Do go?
So the story of the two Samirs isn't just about a lost friendship. It actually reveals a really crucial truth. Not all differences are created equal. Let's unpack what that really means.
So, on one hand, you've got diversity. The differences in culture and belief, like one Samir being Hindu and the other Muslim, these are the kinds of differences that can really enrich our world. But on the other hand, you have inequality, the lack of access to opportunities, like one Samir getting an education while the other has to work, and those are the differences that create barriers. To put it really simply, inequality is when the starting line just isn't the same for everybody. For Samir Do, his poverty and his lack of education weren't just differences, they were disadvantages. They came from inequality, and it's that inequality, not their religious diversity, that most likely put him in harm's way. So that makes you wonder, right? Where do all these rich tapestries of culture and language and tradition, where do they even come from? Well, the answer is literally written on the map, shaped by these two powerful forces, geography and history.
Just take a look at these two regions in India. On the left, you see the stark, high-altitude desert of Ladakh, and on the right, the lush, green coastline of Kerala. The land itself practically dictates a completely different way of life.
So up in Ladakh, that mountainous terrain led to an economy built on pashmina wool, and its location on the trade route to Tibet brought Buddhism and Islam into the region. Now go all the way down south to coastal Kerala. There, the sea brought trade in spices, and with it, merchants from all over the world, creating this incredible, vibrant mix of cultures and religions.
So, okay, with all of these deep historical differences, how can a nation as vast and as varied as India find any common ground? Well, the answer lies in this powerful idea that actually became the nation's motto.
Unity in diversity. It was championed by India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. He believed that real unity wasn't about trying to erase differences. No, it was about celebrating them.
And a lot of the time, this unity was actually forged in the fire of a shared struggle. After the tragic Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a song was written with the line, "The blood of Hindus and Muslims flows together today." In their fight for freedom, people from all backgrounds found a common cause that was bigger than their differences, something the two Samirs were just starting to figure out for themselves.
So we're left with this really powerful idea. Diversity isn't a weakness, it's a strength. But in a world that so often feels fractured and divided, how can we in our own lives find unity not by ignoring our differences, but by actually embracing them? I think that's a question for all of us to answer. Thanks for joining me.
All right, let's dive into a really big idea today, equality. Now, that's a word we hear all the time, right? It's a promise that sits at the very core of a nation. But what happens when that huge, beautiful promise bumps up against the messy reality of our daily lives? That's what we're going to explore. Just take a look at this. It's a perfect way to think about society, isn't it? From a distance, it all looks like one simple pattern. But when you get closer, you see that every single piece is different, totally unique. And that's us. We're all individuals. So the real puzzle is, how on earth do you build a society that's fair to every single one of us? To figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to start with the promise itself, that foundational commitment a nation makes to all of its people. You know, at its core, the promise is actually pretty simple. It's that you, me, everyone, can live our lives and be who we are without being afraid of discrimination. And this isn't just some nice, hopeful thought. It's the glue. It's the essential thing that holds a society as diverse as this one together. So where is this promise made official? I mean, it's not just some idea floating in the air, right? Nope. It's written down, set in stone, in the most important document in the country. And here it is. This is the preamble to the Constitution of India. You can think of it as the nation's mission statement. It lays out the most fundamental values right there on page 1. And just look at those first few words. This is so powerful. It doesn't say the government decrees or the leaders declare. It starts with we the people. That's a huge deal because it means this promise comes from all of us. It belongs to the citizens. And here it comes. After saying who is making the promise, the preamble tells us exactly what is being promised. It's a rock-solid commitment to secure to all its citizens. And that promise stands on 4 amazing pillars. You've got justice in every part of life, liberty, the freedom to think and believe what you want, fraternity, this idea that we're all in it together, and right there in the middle, what we're talking about today, equality, the promise of equal status and equal opportunity for every last one of us. Okay, that is an incredibly powerful ideal. It's inspiring. But how does a grand promise like that really stack up against the little, everyday stereotypes we all run into? And let's be honest, maybe even hold ourselves. You know what? Let's do a quick exercise together. It's a simple little matching game, but it's designed to show us some of those unconscious biases that can really get in the way of seeing people for who they are. Ready to play? Okay, so here's how it works. On the left, you've got 4 little stories. On the right, 4 endings. Just take a second and match them up in your head. Who's the athlete? What's going on with the surgeons? Go ahead, lock in your answers. All right, ready for the big reveal? Let's start with those 2 surgeons. When you read that, did you automatically picture 2 men? Well, in this story, one of them is a mother calling to speak with her daughter. A simple little twist that totally flips a common stereotype on its head. How about the boy who won the drawing competition? When you imagined him going up to get his prize, did you see him walking? The story tells us he went up in a wheelchair, challenging our ideas about what ability and talent look like. And the world-class athlete? You'd think they'd have to be in perfect health, right? Turns out, they suffer from chronic asthma. It just goes to show you that peak performance can come in all sorts of packages. And finally, the person who wasn't well off. It's so easy for us to assume that a lack of resources means a lack of big dreams. But her dream was about as big as they come, to be an astronaut. And she did it, proving that where you start doesn't have to decide where you end up. So what this whole exercise really does is shine a bright light on that gap we were talking about. The gap between the ideal of equality and the reality we live in. A gap that's often filled with these exact kinds of stereotypes. And here it is, side by side. It's such a stark contrast. On one side, you have the beautiful ideal from the Constitution, equality of status and of opportunity, so clear, so powerful. And on the other, the simple, honest truth. Inequalities exist even today. So the big question becomes, what do we do about this gap? How do we get from the promise to the reality? Well, the key seems to be reframing how we think about the idea of equality itself. And this, right here, is maybe the most important takeaway of all. Equality isn't a finish line. It's not a box you check off and say, okay, we're done. It's a value that we have to keep striving for. It's not something that's just going to happen on its own. It takes work. So what does that work actually look like? Well, it's a two-way street. First, it takes people's struggles, people demanding their rights, speaking up, and fighting for change. But that has to be combined with positive actions from the government to actually break down barriers and open up new opportunities for everyone. And that brings us full circle. We have the promise, we see the reality, and we know the gap in between. The Constitution points the way, but closing that gap is a constant struggle. It takes all of us challenging our own assumptions and supporting others. Which really leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about. What part will you play? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to peel back the layers on a word we hear all the time, a force that shapes our world in ways we probably don't even realize. We are, of course, talking about government. Okay, so take a look at these headlines. You've got one about onion prices, another about flood planning, and a third about protecting workers' rights. They seem totally unrelated, don't they? I mean, what on earth could possibly tie them all together? Well, the answer is government. It's like this invisible thread that runs through all these different parts of our daily lives, making decisions that affect everything from the food we buy to the safety of our homes. So let's start by looking at just how government is everywhere. It's kind of like the operating system for our entire society, running quietly in the background. And that leads to a really big question. What is a government's actual job? What's on its to-do list? You might be surprised by just how long and varied that list really is. I mean, just look at this. The scope is huge. A government decides where to build roads and schools, but it also creates programs to help the poor. It protects our borders, manages relationships with other countries, and organizes relief when disaster strikes. And of course, a huge part of its job is to make and enforce the laws that we all live by, and run essential services like the mail and the trains. It's a lot. Now here's something you might not think of right away. Courts. Upholding justice is a critical government function. The entire judicial system, which settles our disputes and makes sure the laws are actually being followed, is a fundamental piece of the government structure. And here's another piece of that puzzle. Think about public services that are just essential. Things like a national railway system. The government runs these, providing the basic infrastructure that literally keeps the country moving. And it doesn't stop there. The government also oversees crucial national resources. Energy, for example, like petroleum. This is to make sure that the absolute essentials for the economy are being managed for the good of everyone. Okay, after seeing all that, you have to be wondering, right? How can one single organization possibly manage so many different things across such a massive country? Well, the secret is in how it's structured. It's not just one giant blob. The government works on 3 different levels. First, you've got the local level, which deals with your immediate community, your village or your town. Then there's the state level, which handles things for an entire state. And at the top, you have the national level, which is responsible for the country as a whole. So let's make this super clear with a few examples. Say a city like Patna needs a new park for kids to play in. That's a local decision. But what if the state of Haryana wants to give free electricity to its farmers? That's a state-level action. And then for the really big picture stuff, like maintaining peace with Russia or introducing a new 1,000 rupee note, that all has to be handled at the national level. Each level has its own turf. Okay, so we know what government does and how it's organized. But that leaves one huge question. Where does its power, its actual authority to make these decisions and enforce these laws really come from? The answer to that question really depends on the type of government we're talking about. And for the most part, it boils down to two very different systems, a democracy and a monarchy. In a democracy, the power flows up from the people. We, the citizens, give the government its power by electing our leaders. And this is key. That government has to answer to us. It has to explain its actions. In a monarchy, it's the complete opposite. Power is inherited. It's passed down through a royal family. The king or queen has the final say and doesn't have to explain their decisions to anybody. And this image just says it all, doesn't it? On one side, you've got power by birthright, all in the hands of one person. And on the other, you have people demanding that power, fighting for the right to choose for themselves. And that brings us to a really important point. That right to vote in a democracy, it wasn't a gift, it was won. It was won through long, hard struggle. That struggle was for an idea called universal adult franchise. It sounds complicated, but it's actually a beautifully simple and totally revolutionary idea. Every single adult in a country gets to vote. That's the foundation of any real democracy today. But, it wasn't always like this. For a long, long time, voting was a privilege saved for a tiny group of people, basically men who owned property and were educated. That meant almost everyone else, women, the poor, people without formal education, they had zero say in how their own country was run. The women's suffrage movement is just such a powerful example of this fight. When World War I happened, women stepped up and took on jobs that had always been considered men's work, which really shattered a lot of old stereotypes. But to make their voices heard, suffragettes had to protest publicly, chain themselves to railings, even go on hunger strikes. And all that courage and persistence, it worked. American women won the right to vote in 1920, and women in the UK got equal voting rights in 1928. And this wasn't just a Western phenomenon. Right here, in India, before independence, the exact same kind of injustice was happening. Only a tiny, privileged minority of people were allowed to vote, leaving millions and millions of people completely voiceless. This quote from Gandhiji from 1931 just perfectly captures the moral heart of the movement. He wrote, "I cannot possibly bear the idea that a man who has got wealth should get the vote, but a man who has got character but no wealth or literacy should have no vote." You can just feel the injustice he's pointing to, the idea that a good person's character means less than their bank account. Which brings us to the most important takeaway of all this. That long, hard fight for the right to vote established one fundamental truth about democracy. The power really, truly belongs to the people. Your vote is your voice. So we'll leave you with this to think about. If voting is power, and that power is in your hands, what does it really mean to use it wisely and shape the world you want to live in? So what really holds a democracy together? It's a much bigger question than you might think. See, it's not just about voting. It's about how we all participate, how we handle disagreements, and, maybe most importantly, how we fight for what's fair. Today, we're going to break down the essential ingredients for a healthy democracy. And believe it or not, our story starts with a surprising discovery inside an old scrapbook. All right, so picture this. We're in Johannesburg, South Africa. An 11-year-old girl named Maya is helping her mom clean up, and she stumbles upon this old scrapbook. As she's flipping through it, one photo just grabs her attention. It's a picture of a schoolboy, looks about 15, named Hector Peterson. When Maya asks her mom who he is, the answer is just chilling. He was shot by the police. Maya's reaction is exactly what yours or mine would be. Why, right? I mean, why would the police shoot a student? And that one simple, powerful question, well, it opens a door to a whole system of government that's honestly hard for many of us to even wrap our heads around. So, to understand why Hector was killed, we have to understand the world he was living in. We need to talk about the system that was in charge of South Africa at the time, apartheid. The word apartheid literally means apartness, and that's exactly what it was. It was a brutal system of laws built entirely on racial segregation. The government divided everyone into rigid categories, white, black, Indian, and colored, and by law, these groups were absolutely forbidden from mixing. And when I say separation, I mean it was absolute. This wasn't just some social norm. This was the law, and it was designed from the ground up to be deeply unequal. You had well-equipped ambulances for white people and poorly equipped ones for black people. The best farmland was saved for whites. And here's the kicker. Non-whites had zero voice in their own government. They weren't allowed to vote. Which brings us back to Hector. He and his classmates were being forced to learn Afrikaans in school, the language of the white minority government. But they wanted to learn in their own language, Zulu. So they joined a protest. They were protesting for their culture, for their very identity. And the police? They responded with just unbelievable force, beating the students and then firing live rounds into the crowd. One of those bullets killed Hector. Hector's death in 1976 became this incredibly powerful symbol for the struggle against apartheid. It helped spark a long, difficult fight, led by groups like the African National Congress and, of course, its leader, Nelson Mandela. It would take almost 20 more years of struggle, but finally, in 1994, the system fell. South Africa became a democracy, where every person was declared equal under the law. Now, this story, born from such a deep injustice, actually gives us the perfect roadmap. It shows us the fundamental things every single democracy needs to function. It shows us what's really at stake. So let's break down those key ingredients. Okay, first up, participation. You know, a democracy isn't a spectator sport. It actually falls apart if people don't get involved. So how exactly do people make their voices heard? Well, the most obvious way is through elections, right? We vote for people to represent us. But here's the real secret sauce behind the vote. Those leaders don't get to stay in power forever. They have fixed terms. If they want to get reelected, they have to answer to us, the people. That's the very heart of accountability. But look, just voting every few years, that's really just the starting line. Real meaningful participation is a constant thing. It's what happens in all the days, weeks, and months between the elections. Take a look at this. It's a simple letter to a newspaper from someone complaining that posters are making the city look bad. Now, it might seem like a small thing, but this is democracy in action. Participation means taking an interest, criticizing the government when you need to, and having an opinion on everything from big policies to local stuff like this. And, of course, sometimes participation has to get a lot louder. People form social movements, they hold rallies, they go on strike, they organize signature campaigns. These are all incredibly powerful ways to put pressure on a government and make sure it's actually listening. Okay, but what happens when all these participating people disagree? I mean, conflict is going to happen in any diverse society. It's just a fact of life. And that brings us to the second key ingredient of a healthy democracy. You need a way to resolve conflict peacefully. Think back to Hector's story. That conflict was met with violence because one group just used brute force to silence the other. A real democracy has to offer a different path. The government's job is to step in and help people work out their differences, using the rule of law, not violence. Let's look at a real-world example. So in India, there's a river called the Kaveri. It flows through two different states, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. And for decades, this one river has been the source of some major conflict. And the reason is simple. They both desperately need the water. So here's the problem. Karnataka is upstream, and it uses a dam to get water to its big cities. But Tamil Nadu, which is downstream, depends on that same water for its farms, and farming is the backbone of their economy. So Tamil Nadu only gets water if Karnataka decides to release it. You see the issue? Both states have totally legitimate, critical needs, and there just isn't enough water for both of them to have everything they want. And this is exactly where democratic government is so crucial. The central government's job is to step in as a kind of neutral referee. It has to find a fair compromise and work out a distribution of water that both states can live with. It's a system designed specifically to stop these kinds of disputes from boiling over into chaos or violence. All of this leads us to what is maybe the deepest, most foundational part of a democracy. It's not just about participating or resolving conflicts. There has to be a commitment to something bigger: equality and justice. It really comes down to this core idea. You just cannot have one without the other. If people aren't treated as equals, there can be no real justice. It's impossible. And you know, this isn't a passive thing. A democratic government can't just put up a sign that says everyone is equal and then call it a day. It has a real responsibility to actively look for where society is unequal and then take actual steps to fix those historical and ongoing injustices. Here's a great example. In a lot of societies, there's been a historical bias that values boys more than girls. So to fight that injustice, a government might create what are called special provisions, like maybe lowering or even getting rid of school fees for girls. Now, the goal isn't to treat people differently just for the sake of it. The goal is to give them a tool to overcome a disadvantage that was already there and create a much more level playing field for everybody.
So we have participation, we have conflict resolution, and we have this deep commitment to justice. But none of these things work, not one, without the final, most essential ingredient, and that's you.
I love this quote because it really just nails it. The strength of any democracy depends completely on its citizens, on us, on people being alert, being interested, and being willing to hold their government accountable. At the end of the day, a government is only as democratic as its people demand it to be. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. The next time you're driving or walking and you see a protest happening on the street, don't just dismiss it as noise. Just for a second, pause and ask yourself, what is this about? Who are these people? What are they asking for? Because trying to understand their story, well, that's the very first step toward being the alert, engaged citizen that democracy absolutely depends on.
So, how does a tiny village solve a crisis that could, threaten its very survival? Well, it's not with some big order from a distant capital. Nope. It's with a face-to-face meeting, right there under a tree. We're about to dive into how one community's argument over something as basic as water and justice, well, it actually reveals this incredibly powerful lesson in democracy.
It's a question that really applies everywhere, doesn't it? When resources get scarce and fairness is on the line, how do people actually come together to find a solution? For the story we're telling today, the answer begins in a little village called Hardis.
So, our story takes place right here, in Hardis Village. And for the people who live here, everything, and I mean everything, kicks off with this meeting. It's called the Gram Sabha. And this is a big deal, because it's the very first one since the new village council was elected. So you can bet everyone is pretty eager, maybe even a little anxious to see what's going to happen.
And let me tell you, the stakes could not be higher. The new leaders aren't just, talking about fixing a few roads. No, they are facing two absolutely urgent crises that affect every single person in Hardis.
First up, you've got a problem of pure survival. The village is literally running out of water. And second, there's a problem of fairness. The official poverty list, it looks rigged, and that's starting to stir up a lot of whispers and resentment.
And look, this isn't some abstract policy debate. A villager named Tajia, she actually stands up and makes it painfully real for everyone. You can just feel the desperation in her words. The groundwater is disappearing. Women are having to walk 3 kilometers just to get water. The situation is absolutely critical.
So, where do they hash all this out? In the Gram Sabha. This is democracy at its most fundamental level. It's the people's assembly where every single adult has a voice.
Okay, so when it comes to the water crisis, two very different ideas pop up. Some people want a quick fix, deepen the hand pumps, clean out the wells, and just get through the season. But others are arguing, hey, that's just a Band-Aid. Then a villager named Anwar proposes something way more ambitious. It's a long-term plan he actually saw in another state, something that could fundamentally fix their water problem for good.
And this image, wow, it just perfectly illustrates what Anwar is talking about. On one side, you see this dry, difficult landscape, which is pretty much what they're dealing with. But on the other side, that's what's possible with watershed management, a green, thriving environment. You see, this isn't just about water. It's about completely transforming their future. And you can tell, the villagers are definitely intrigued.
Okay, now for the next item on the agenda, and this is where things get really, really tense. It's time to approve the below the poverty line list, or the BPL list. This is the one that decides who gets crucial government support.
So as the names are being read out loud, you can just feel this murmur spreading through the crowd. People start whispering to each other. I mean, they know their neighbors, right? They know who's struggling and who isn't. And they know something on this list is just very, very wrong.
Yeah, the problem is immediately obvious to everyone. The list is completely upside down. Get this. Natwar, a guy who just bought a new TV and a motorcycle, he's on the list. So is Birju, who owns a ton of land. But Om Prakash, a landless laborer who is genuinely struggling to survive, he's been left off. This isn't just some clerical error. It's a flat-out injustice.
And here's the reason why everyone's whispering instead of shouting. Natwar and Birju, they happen to be friends with Amir Chand, the powerful former landowner. And yeah, he still holds a lot of power and influence in this village. And he's sitting right there in the meeting, watching everyone. So the question is, who would dare challenge him?
But then someone does. A woman named Siraj.
She gets up, and despite all that tension, despite Amir Chan sitting right there, she speaks up. And she doesn't just complain either. She advocates for the person who was wronged. She just says simply that Om Prakash's name should be on that list. It is a moment of just incredible courage.
Okay, so what we've just seen, everything from the big debate about water to Saroj's incredibly brave stand, that is local democracy in action. But what makes it all possible? Well, to get that, we need to take a quick look at the system behind this meeting. How does this whole thing actually work?
Well, it all starts with the Gram Sabha. Now, this isn't some elected council. It is the people. Every single adult voter in the village is a member. Just think of it as the ultimate decision maker and the village watchdog, all rolled into one.
And then you have the Gram Panchayat. Now this is the small group of people who are elected by the Gram Sabha. So you can think of them as the village council, or maybe an executive committee. Their job is to actually implement the plans and development programs for the village, and they do that for a 5-year term.
Okay, so here's the key difference, and this is really important. The Gram Sabha is everyone. They're the ultimate authority. The Gram Panchayat is the elected few who do the actual work. The Sabha approves the plans and, crucially, holds the Panchayat accountable. So yeah, the Panchayat works for the Sabha, not the other way around.
And what's happening in Hardas, that Gram Panchayat, that's really just the first step. This whole system is called Panchayati Raj, and it actually has 3 levels. So if you zoom out from the village, you get to the block level, the Panchayat Samiti. And if you zoom out again, you get to the district level, the Zila Parishad, which coordinates planning for the whole district. It's a beautiful structure of democracy, really, built from the ground up.
So after seeing the debates in Hardas and kind of getting how the structure works, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it really all comes down to one essential idea.
It's this. The entire system hinges on the Gram Sabha. I mean, without an active, engaged assembly of citizens, the rest of the structure just can't function properly. It really is the heart of local democracy.
So why is it the heart? Well, because it's the one place where leaders have to actually stand up and justify their plans to the public. It's the mechanism that stops corruption, like that rigged poverty list. And most importantly, it's the reason that everyday people like Tijia and Saroj have the power to demand better from the leaders they elected.
You know, this isn't just a story about some faraway village. Every single community has its own version of a Gram Sabha. It might be a town hall, a city council meeting, maybe a school board hearing. The people of Hardas, they showed up to decide their future. So the only question left really is, are you showing up for yours? You know, when we hear a term like rural administration, it sounds, well, a little dry, right? But what if I told you it's actually about a fight for justice, a stolen piece of land, and the quiet, powerful systems that literally keep our communities from falling apart? So picture this. It all kicks off with something small. A farmer, Mohan, is out one morning and he sees that the boundary marker, the little ridge of earth called a bund, between his field and his neighbor's has been moved. It's just a few feet, but in his world, those few feet are everything. And here's where the drama really begins. We have Mohan, who's a pretty small-time farmer. And then we have Raghu, whose family owns a ton of land. And get this, his uncle is the head of the village. So this isn't a fair fight, not by a long shot. It's the classic little guy versus the big, powerful neighbor.
Now, with a power imbalance like that, you can probably guess what happens next. This isn't going to stay a simple disagreement for long.
Mohan confronts Raghu, who just flat out denies everything. The argument gets really heated, and suddenly Raghu calls in his workers. They start beating Mohan, injuring his head and hand pretty badly. It's only when neighbors rush in that they stop. So just like that, a land dispute has turned into a violent assault.
So Mohan's hurt and he's out of options. What can he do? He has to turn to the official system for help, and that journey starts at the local police station.
Mohan and the neighbors who saw what happened, they all decide to go file a report. But, there's doubt in the air. Some of the neighbors think it's a total waste of money. Others are pretty scared that Raghu's influential family has already paid off the police.
Someone even suggests going to the bigger main police station in town. But Mohan points out something absolutely crucial here. He says, look, it's not about money or who you know. It's about rules. Our village is under the control of this specific local station. We have to report it here.
And right there, that's a key piece of how all this administration stuff works. Every single police station has a defined geographic area it's responsible for. If a crime happens inside those boundaries, whether it's a fight, a theft, whatever, it's their job and only their job to handle it.
But getting to the right place is only half the battle. When they get there, the officer in charge, the SHO, he just blows them off. He rudely tells Mohan he can't be bothered with such a minor complaint, and doesn't even seem to believe he's really hurt. The system itself is now the roadblock.
But this is where things get interesting. The neighbors, they don't back down. They step up and start arguing. They tell the officer, "We saw the whole thing. If we hadn't been there, he would have been hurt way worse." They demand that he register the case. Their combined voices, as eyewitnesses, are just too powerful to ignore, and the officer finally agrees to file the report. Okay, so the police are now investigating the assault. But what about the original problem? The whole reason this fight started? The stolen land? Well, that's a completely different kind of issue, and it needs a completely different expert. And this really makes you wonder, right? The police can handle the violence, sure, but how do you solve the actual land problem without it coming to blows? Is there a system in place for that? Well, yes, of course there is. And that system comes down to one person, the Patwari. Now, you might hear different names for this job depending on where you are, like Pal, Kanugo, village officer, but the role is the same. This is the person whose entire job is to measure land and, most importantly, keep all the official records about who owns what.
So how does a Patwari actually solve a fight like this? Well, it's not magic. It all comes down to a few surprisingly simple but really powerful tools.
The Patwari's power is all about data. They have two key things: a super detailed map of every single plot of land in the village, and a ledger, a register that has all the written information about each of those plots. And when you look at that register, the Khazra record, it's amazing how clear it all becomes. We can see right here, Mohan's land is exactly 0.75 hectares. Raghu's land is exactly 3.00 hectares. It even has their father's names, what crops they're growing. It even shows that Raghu has a working well on his property. It is all right there in black and white. So you see how this works. The solution is actually pretty simple. All the Patwari has to do is go out, physically measure the fields as they are right now, and compare those numbers to what's in the official record. If Raghu's field is now bigger than 3 hectares and Mohan's is smaller than 0.75, well, there's your proof. The boundary was moved. No argument, just cold, hard facts.
And you know, the Patwari isn't just out there on their own. They're part of a bigger structure. They're supervised by a senior official called a Tehsildar, who also helps settle disputes. And then at the top of the district, you have the district collector, who oversees all of it. It's a whole system designed to keep things in check.
Okay, so these records are great for sorting out fights, but they're also at the heart of another huge issue: inheritance. And this is where the story of one little farm connects to a much, much bigger story about rights and equality in our society.
You know, for generations, owning land was a man's world. And this quote, "I want a place of my own, not dowry of silk and gold," it just says it all, doesn't it? It captures this massive shift in thinking, a desire for real rights, for ownership, not just traditional gifts.
Think about it. Before 2005, things were totally different. When a father died, his farmland was pretty much always divided up only between his sons. Women who might have worked on that same land their entire lives had zero legal claim to it. But then a new law came along and just flipped the script. Now, sons, daughters, and their mother all get an equal share.
That year, 2005, that was the game changer. The Hindu Succession Amendment Act was passed, and this new rule applied across the country, fundamentally rewriting the laws of inheritance for millions and millions of women.
And this isn't just some legal jargon on a piece of paper. This changes real lives. Take someone like Sudha. She can work on her family's farm now with a whole new kind of confidence, with the security that comes from knowing she's not just a helper, she's a rightful owner with a legal share of that land.
So it all comes back to this, doesn't it? We started with a violent fight over a few feet of dirt, and we ended by seeing how these quiet, kind of boring systems, police jurisdictions, land records, inheritance laws, are actually the very foundation, the bedrock, that allows for a fair and peaceful community. It's what keeps things from falling apart. Definitely something to think about.
All right, let's jump right in. When you picture village life, what's the first thing that pops in your head? For most of us, it's probably farming, right? A lone farmer, out in the fields. But here's the thing. That picture is, well, it's incomplete. For millions of people, farming is just one piece of a much bigger, more complex puzzle. So today, we're going to dig into the hidden economics of rural life and find out how people actually make a living. So take a look at this.
This drawing is our window into a village called Kalpatu, right on the coast of Tamil Nadu in India. And if you really look, I mean really look closer, you start to see it's not just about farming. There are people fishing, others are selling vegetables, some are even making bricks. It's not just a village, you know, it's a whole living ecosystem of work.
Yeah, at first glance, it looks pretty bustling, right? Almost idyllic. But that picture raises a huge question. How is everyone actually making a living here? I mean, how do they all put food on the table? Is it a level playing field? Let's peel back some of those layers and see what's really going on underneath.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we're going to zoom in and follow the stories of 3 different people who live in Kalpatu. And trust me, their lives are going to show us 3 completely different worlds, 3 different fortunes, all happening in the exact same village. It's fascinating.
So first up, let's meet Thulasi. Now, Thulasi is landless. She owns 0 land, which means her entire income, her entire survival, depends on other people hiring her for work. And she works these long, hard days for about 40 rupees. But listen to what she says. It's really telling. She doesn't stick with her boss because the pay is great. It's not. She's there because the work is dependable. Just that one word, dependable. It tells you everything you need to know about how uncertain her life is.
All right, next up we have Sekar. Now, unlike Thulasi, Sekar does own land. He's a small farmer. But here's the catch. He only has 2 acres. And this is the part that blows my mind. Even with his own land, the crops he grows can only feed his family for about 8 months out of the year. So for those other 4 months, he's got to hustle to find any other work he can just to get by.
And then there's Ramalingam. Remember Thulasi's dependable boss? This is him. Ramalingam is at the complete other end of the spectrum. He's a large landowner. So while Sekar is trying to make a living on 2 acres, Ramalingam has 20 acres of paddy fields. And you can bet he's not out there working the land himself. Nope, he hires people like Thulasi to do all the heavy lifting.
Okay, let's just lay this out side by side so you can really see it. The difference is just stark. You've got Thulasi with 0 land, completely reliant on day labor. Then there's Sekar with his 2 acres, a farmer, but still has to find other jobs. And then you have Ramalingam sitting on 20 acres, not just farming, but running a bunch of other businesses too. It's crystal clear, isn't it? In this village, how much land you own basically dictates your entire life.
But it's not as simple as them just living separate lives at different income levels. Oh no, this is where things get really interesting and complicated. You see, their lives are all tangled up together. It's like this intricate web of dependence, held together by labor, money, and the big one, debt.
To really get how this web works, let's look at a year in Thulasi's life. Farm work, it's not a 9-to-5 year-round gig. It's super seasonal. She's crazy busy during planting and harvesting time. But then, bam, from January all the way to May, the work just vanishes. It completely dries up. So what does she do? How on earth do you survive for almost half a year with no income?
Well, that's the thing. Life doesn't stop just because the farm work does. Emergencies happen. When Thulasi's daughter got sick, there were no savings to fall back on. So what choice did they have? They had to go and borrow money from, you guessed it, Ramalingam. They even had to sell their only cow to pay him back. And right there, their relationship changes completely. He's not just her boss anymore. Now he's her creditor. He holds her debt.
And it's not just Thulasi. Sekar, our small farmer, he's trapped in a cycle of his own. Think about it. To even plant his crops, he has to take out a loan for seeds and fertilizer from a trader. But here's the trap. Part of the deal is that when he harvests his paddy, he's forced to sell it back to the very same trader who gave him the loan. And of course, the trader buys it at a lower price than the open market. It's a setup that makes it almost impossible to ever get ahead.
So who's winning in this system? We'll look no further than Ramalingam. See, he's not just a guy who owns a lot of land. He owns the whole system. He owns the rice mill where farmers like Sekar have to go. He owns the shop that sells the seeds and pesticides they need to buy. He even acts as the moneylender. He's making a profit at every single step of the way.
Okay, so that's the farming world. It's a pretty clear picture of dependence and debt. But is that the whole story of rural life? Is this cycle just about farming? Or does this pattern show up elsewhere? Let's take a little trip beyond the fields and see. Welcome to Puttapet. It's a fishing village, not too far from Kalpatu, where we just were. Here, families like Aruna and Paravalans live their lives by the rhythm of the sea. And you'd think, okay, this has got to be a totally different world from the paddy fields, right?
Well, not exactly. The core problem they face is shockingly similar.
See, during the monsoon season, which lasts for about 4 months, the fish are breeding, so you can't go out and fish. And just like with the farm work, you have this long, lean season with no money coming in. So what do? They have to borrow money from traders just to survive. And there it is again, the exact same cycle of debt we saw in the fields.
So what we're seeing here, with Thulasi, with Sekar, with Aruna, these aren't just sad one-off stories. They're not isolated incidents. They're actually a snapshot of a much, much larger pattern. So let's zoom out now from these individual lives and take a look at the bigger picture of rural India.
And this right here, this chart shows you the scale of the imbalance. It's pretty incredible. A whopping 80% of farmers in India are small farmers, just like Sekar, working on tiny plots of land that often aren't enough to live on for the whole year. And that other 20%? Well, those are the Ramalingams of the country. And they control most of the land, and by extension, most of the wealth.
And what about people like Tulusi, the ones with no land at all? The number here is just staggering. Think about this. Nearly 2 out of every 5 families in rural India are agricultural laborers. 2 out of 5. That's almost 40% of households whose entire survival depends on whether or not they can find work on someone else's land each day. So when you put it all together, you get this really clear and kind of heartbreaking picture. Everybody in the village lives under the same sun. They face the same monsoons. They share the same seasons. But because of these huge inequalities in who owns the land and who doesn't, the harvests they reap are wildly different. It really makes you wonder, does it have to be like this?
Well, maybe not. It turns out there are other ways of doing things. In a village called Chizami up in Nagaland, the Chakasang community does things differently. They practice this beautiful terrace farming, and while everyone has their own individual fields, they also work together. They form groups, help each other out, and share the workload. It's a totally different model, one built on cooperation instead of dependence.
And that really brings us to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? We've seen how this whole system of land ownership, seasonal work, and debt can create these traps that are so hard to escape. So it leaves us with this one big final question. In a world that's so often defined by individual struggle and dependence, what would it actually take to change the harvest, not just for a few, but for everyone?
Hey there, and welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered who's really in charge of your city? You know, the people who fix the streetlights or make sure the trash gets picked up. Well, it's a bigger story than you might think, and for us, it all kicks off with a simple mistake during a game of cricket.
So picture this. It's a lazy Sunday afternoon. A group of friends, Mala, Shankar, Jahangir, and Rehana, are just having a fun game of cricket. Everything's going great until, wham! Rehana hits the ball, and I mean really hits it. It sails so high it ends up smashing the neighborhood streetlight. Total oops moment.
And just like that, game over. The biggest question on their minds wasn't who won, but, uh-oh, what do we do now? See, they'd broken a window once before, and they had to pool their pocket money to pay for it. But a streetlight? Who'd even pay for that? I mean, who owns the streetlights?
Their little quest for answers led them straight to their neighbor, Yasmin Khala. And it was Rehana's mom who had the brilliant idea. Why her? Well, it turns out Yasmin Khala had just retired from the exact organization they were looking for.
Okay, so the kids have a problem, and it looks like Yasmin Khala has the solution. Let's get into the first piece of this puzzle. What is this mysterious organization?
So Yasmin Khala just kind of chuckles and tells him, look, it's not like you pay one person. She explains that there's this big organization called the Municipal Corporation, and they're the ones who handle all the major city stuff. We're talking everything from streetlights to garbage collection to making sure you have water.
And let me tell you, their job is absolutely massive. Just think about it for a second. They're the ones working to prevent diseases from spreading. They run local schools and hospitals. They even build and take care of the parks you hang out in. This one organization is responsible for so much that impacts our daily lives.
And here's a cool little detail Yasmin Khala shared. The name of this organization actually changes based on how big the city is. So in a huge city like Pune, you've got a municipal corporation, but in a smaller town, it's called a municipal council. Different names, but they pretty much do the same crucial job.
Okay, so if this is such a massive organization, that brings up a really important question, right? Who's actually calling the shots? Who gets to decide, hey, let's put a new park here, or we need a new hospital over there?
Well, here's how the power is split.
On one side, you've got the ward councilors. These are the folks that people like you and me actually vote for. They're the decision makers. Then, on the other side, you have the commissioner and all the administrative staff. They aren't elected, they're appointed government employees, and their job is to implement those decisions, to make them happen.
It's actually a pretty cool multi-step process, and it's designed to start at the neighborhood level. First, the city gets divided up into these different sections called wards. Then, the citizens in each ward elect their very own ward councilor. After that, all the councilors get together, form committees, and hash out the citywide budget. This way, the specific needs of each little neighborhood are supposed to be heard.
Okay, let's follow the money. I mean, running an entire city is obviously super expensive. So, where does all that cash come from?
The simple answer? Taxes. A tax is basically the money that we all chip into the government so it can provide all those services we rely on. You know, everything from clean water to safe streets.
And this gives you a really good picture of where that money is coming from. Yeah, property taxes, the stuff homeowners pay, that's a big slice of the pie, about 25 to 30%. But that's not the whole story. The city also gets money from taxes on things like water, hotels, shops, even your movie tickets. And that's really important, right? It means pretty much everyone is contributing to keeping the city going.
So does that mean it's a one-way street? You just pay your taxes and hope for the best? No way. Absolutely not. The thing is, we as citizens can, and really we should, make our voices heard. And to show them how, Yasmin Kala told them this really powerful story. She said there was a time in her own neighborhood when the garbage just stopped getting picked up. It was piling up everywhere, attracting rats and flies. It got so bad that parents were actually scared to let their kids play outside. This is where a woman named Gangabai comes in. She rallied the whole community. She knew that just complaining to each other wasn't going to solve anything. They had to go straight to the person they elected, their ward councilor. After all, he worked for them.
And Gangabai was smart. She didn't just show up and yell. She had a plan. First, she organized a small protest right outside the councilor's house. Then, she got a petition and had every adult in the area sign it. And for the final step, she got a meeting with the top dog, the commissioner, and she made sure to bring her councilor and a sanitation engineer with her. Now that is how you do it.
So in the meeting, the commissioner tries to give them an excuse, right? He says, oh, we just don't have enough trucks. But Gangabai was ready. She fired right back with, but you seem to have enough trucks to collect garbage from the rich localities. Her comeback was so smart and so direct, it apparently left him completely speechless.
Now, it wasn't a magic fix. It didn't happen overnight. They actually had to stage another protest, an even bigger one this time. But their persistence totally paid off. The sanitation service in their neighborhood finally became regular. And that's the real lesson here, isn't it? When citizens get organized, they can make real change happen. As you can imagine, the kids were just completely captivated by Gangabai's story. They thanked Yasmin Kala for explaining everything. It was starting to get dark, so they headed for home, but you could tell their minds were just buzzing with what they'd learned.
But on the way, they look up, and there it is, the broken streetlight, the thing that started this whole adventure. They look at each other, a little smile passes between them, and then they turn around and run right back to Yasmin Kala's house. So that leaves us with a final question for you. Now that they're inspired by Gangabai's story, what do you think they're going to do next?
Hey there, have you ever stopped to think about what really makes a city tick? Today we're going to pull back the curtain, taking a journey from the busiest street corners to the top floors of office towers. We're going to meet the people whose daily work is the absolute lifeblood of any city.
All right, let's just dive right in. I mean, look at this picture. It's buzzing with life, right? You've got vendors, buses, people rushing to work, to school. It's this constant motion. We're about to go on a journey to meet the folks who make all of this happen, day in and day out.
So who are all these people, really? Are they their own bosses? Do they work for someone else? How do they manage to build a life and a living in this huge, complicated urban puzzle? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
And we're talking about a massive scale here. To really get a handle on it, we're going to zoom way in and follow the stories of 4 completely different people. Their experiences are going to give us a real ground-level view of this complex economic world.
So our journey starts right here, out on the street. It's the part of the city's economy that we all see every day. And for a whole lot of people, it's also the toughest place to make a living.
First up, we're meeting Bachu. He's a cycle rickshaw puller who moved to the city from his village in Bihar. He came here for one reason, to find consistent work so he could support his family back home.
His story is one shared by millions.
And this is straight from him, in his own words. You know, this is such a powerful and common story for so many people who migrate to cities. They're driven by this fundamental need for a steady income that they just can't find where they're from.
So, let's break down what his life actually looks like. Yeah, he's self-employed, he's his own boss, but look at those numbers. After he pays for food and a place to sleep, there's barely anything left over. And this is the kicker. If he gets sick, that's it. No work, no money. There's just no safety net at all.
And you gotta understand, Bokchu is not an exception. This number, it's just staggering. 1 crore. That's 10 million people working as street vendors and laborers in cities across India. 10 million.
So what does this all boil down to? For millions, their entire livelihood is built on a foundation of instability. They have to organize everything themselves, their shops are often just temporary setups, and they're living with this constant threat that at any moment they could be told to just pack up and go.
All right, so from the open street, let's head indoors, into the world of markets and factories. A bit more structured, maybe, but as we're about to see, not always more secure.
And right away, we meet a totally different kind of entrepreneur. This is Harpreet and Vandana. They own a permanent showroom, a proper shop. It's a world away from Bokchu's rickshaw on the streets.
And you can really hear their business smarts in this quote from Vandana, who's a dress designer. They're not just selling clothes. They're paying attention to what people want. They've adapted, focusing on ready-made stuff and making their store look good to draw people in.
So their story, it really shows you the other side of the coin, right? Because they have a licensed, permanent shop, they have security, they're not just workers, they're employers. And that success is tangible, which has led to them buying a car, booking a flat, a totally different world.
Okay, but now let's shift gears again. What you're looking at here is called a labor choke. Basically, it's a spot where daily wage laborers wait every single morning just hoping to get picked for a day's work. And this is where we meet our next person, Nirmala.
And Nirmala's story, wow, it just lays bare a really tough reality. Even though she works in a factory, her job is completely insecure. She works these incredibly long days, but she's a casual worker. That means when business is slow, for 3 or 4 months a year, she has zero work. Absolutely no security, no protection.
And this image here, it just says it all, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the labor chalk, the world of daily uncertainty. And on the other, you have those office towers, a symbol of stability and permanence. It's like 2 separate universes existing side by side in the exact same city.
All right, for our last stop, we're heading inside one of those glass towers to see a whole different way of working.
So here we meet Sudha, and she is at the complete other end of the spectrum from, say, Bokchu or Nirmala. She isn't a casual worker or a street vendor. She's a salaried professional with a permanent job, a real career.
I mean, the difference is just night and day, isn't it? She gets a regular salary every month. She has serious responsibilities managing a team of 50 people. And most importantly, she has stability. She can plan for the future. This is a world away from that day-to-day hustle and uncertainty.
And this is where that difference becomes really concrete. These are just perks, they're life-changing benefits. We're talking savings for when she gets older, paid holidays, medical care for her whole family, and the ability to get sick without losing her income. It's a safety net, and it's one that millions of workers simply do not have.
Okay, so let's take a step back. We've met 4 different people: a rickshaw puller, a couple of business owners, a casual factory worker, and a marketing manager. Their lives seem worlds apart. But are they? How do they all fit together to make the city run?
This chart just lays it all out side by side. It's so clear. Just look across the rows, the workplace, the pay, the security, or lack of it, and the benefits. It's a perfect snapshot of the deep economic divides that exist inside just one city.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, even though these 4 people might never actually meet, their work is all tied together. They depend on each other. Sudha might buy a dress from Harpreet and Vandana's showroom. Harpreet might take a ride in Bokchu's rickshaw to get to the market. The company Nirmala sews for needs that casual labor to keep costs down. It's this huge interconnected system, and the city needs every single one of them to keep moving.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. Next time you're out and about in your city, just take a second. Look around. Think about the person driving the bus, the owner of the small shop, the construction worker, the office manager. Think about this huge, invisible web of people whose work, seen and unseen, is what truly makes your city come alive.